So, Berto, patron Cameron wrote in and requested that we talk about culture shock or reverse culture shock. The culture shock of returning to your home culture after you've at least partially acculturated to a new culture. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like you were born in Colombia.
That's right.
And lived there, Colombia, for a long time.
Right.
And then you came to the States, and then sometimes you go back to Colombia.
Yeah, in fact, the first time I went back, I experienced some, what did you call it? Reverse cultural shock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, double reverse retroactive culture shock.
That's right. Because it had been 6 years, and I had left when I was 15. So they were important 6 years. You know?
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Berto, tell me some experiences. I want to know.
Okay, so
But before we do that, let's introduce the podcast. This is a Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a professor and a therapist. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I grow tulips.
So, Berto, tell me about your double reverse entendre culture shock experiences.
Yeah, so the first thing that was very obvious is I go back, and everyone's like, oh, so you're talking like a gringo now. Because I had like an accent all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And I couldn't hear it, but I was getting stuck on all sorts of words. I was like...
How'd they say that in Spanish?
It's like, se oye como un gringo ahora. It's like, está todo gringo. And so I'd be like, wait a minute, I have an accent? They're like,
is gringo a bad word?
It's not a bad word. It's just, it's the kind of a condescending word for North America.
Is it as bad as cracker?
No.
It's not as bad as cracker.
No, although actually, I should be careful in being too quick to dismiss that angle, because the truth is, as you're probably aware, there was a lot of abuse inflicted from the U.S. to a lot of the southern South America and Central America countries, and from businesses that did abusive practice, all these things. So I think there might have been historically some of that. When I was growing up, it was really more of almost a humorous thing, like those gringos and their unfunny jokes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like we had this perspective that, which is not too far, but it was like when we thought of gringo humor, it was always pie in the face type stuff. It's like, oh, those gringos with their pies in the face,
Were you watching a lot of Three Stooges or something?
Probably that's where it came from. Yeah, maybe.
And like Tom and Jerry.
But honestly, a lot of the 80s stuff was really silly,
Yeah.
And so, but that was our media.
Yeah.
So we're like, oh, these silly people.
Was Colombian humor more sophisticated than American humor in the 80s?
I don't know, but I do know that like the Colombian humor, because we didn't have as many movies or anything like that, so it was just more social humor. So a lot of sarcasm, a lot of inside jokes between, like anytime you have a group of people that knows each other, you're gonna have more sophisticated things.
Yeah, but in the media, because this is actually a thing that I've never studied, but something that I sometimes think, because as a Japanese American, I have a lot of contact with Japanese humor. And although I can't speak Japanese, I can tell you that in the media, Japanese humor is like the way American humor was decades before now. Whereas British humor 40 years ago was way more sophisticated than American humor was. So there's like a spectrum of sophistication. And by sophistication, what I mean is humor is like, I think of it like music, where when very rudimentary music is pentatonic scale, and you'll hear these, da 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 da. That's pentatonic. It's very simple.
Yeah.
It's like what you would sing to a baby. In fact, a lot of baby tunes, a lot of lullabies are in pentatonic. And then you do an iteration of that, which plays on the foundation of pentatonic or the foundation of simple music, but provides variation to keep the interest going. So it's like, instead of ba da da, it's da 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 da, and then you start adding some jazz beats that are off the beat. Again, rhythmically, this is very easy to follow, right?
Right.
But if you're jazz, you're at da 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 da,
and you've lost the baby,
right? And so I consider humor to be the same way.
Yeah.
There's like extremely simple humor, like pie in the face.
Yeah.
And then as a society gets more sophisticated with their humor, they start doing iterations and different expectations.
Like you draw 3.1415 on someone's forehead.
Exactly. Like when I just got that. So like when the British Office came out, I was not ready for that when it first came out. Like the first time I saw it, I was like, that's not funny to me. That's awful.
Okay.
But then like 5 years later, I rewatched it and I had absorbed enough humor so that the Office actually, I saw how it was funny. Whereas people in Britain or whoever enjoyed that show when it first came out, they had already, it's like jazz. When I was young, I had no idea why people like jazz.
Same, yeah.
I was like, what the hell? This is all just gibberish.
Yeah.
But actually now at my older age, I can appreciate jazz now, particularly as a musician and no like variation in music.
Yeah. That by the way, that happened to me when in high school. I went to the do you remember these things, record stores where you
yeah.
I went and I was looking and I saw this guy, looked young, and it said Harry Connick Jr. 20. And he had like his piano. I'm like, oh, it's piano music. I like it. Took it home. I had no idea it was jazz. And I start listening to it. And like you said, I was like, this makes no sense. First of all, it's offbeat. I was like, there's no rhythm here.
Yeah.
Second, I was listening to Stardust. He's singing Stardust. And I'm like, where's the melody? There's no repeating melody here. What the hell is going on? Yeah. And it took me many listens to start hearing it and being like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. There's actually a total intricate beat, and there is a melody, and it's beautiful. But it wasn't it was an acquired taste for sure.
Right, and even within jazz, you have different levels of.
Oh, because that stuff is as vanilla. Well, it's great, but it's not modern fusion jazz or acid jazz or any of that.
Right.
Stuff. Yeah.
So humor is the same way, and so. How did we get on this topic?
Okay, so
I was asking you about Colombia.
And I think the answer is this. Look, to some extent, it was just, they're foreigners, so we're going to make fun of them. There was a bit of that. But at the same time, I will say, okay, so we had a lot of Mexican shows and we had some Colombian shows. In my biased opinion, some of the Colombian funny shows were a little more sort of British style, not quite as dry though. And I think the Mexican shows, which I did love and were funny, were a little more pie in the face. And then we perceived the gringo shows as being extremely pie in the face. Yeah. But the unfair part of that is we never saw comedians. Like we never saw stand-up stuff. We only saw the 80s shows, which were like, think about all those sitcoms and all, it was like as pie in the face as it comes.
Laverne and Shirley,
like all that stuff.
Yeah.
But if we had seen comedians, there was a lot of great comedians in the 80s.
Yeah.
And we just never saw that.
And the 70s for that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And we just were now exposed to that. So our perception of gringo humor was literally 80s sitcoms.
Yeah. Okay. So you're in Colombia.
Yeah, I'm in Colombia. So I'm back there. They're making fun of my accent. I'm also getting stuck on words because I left when I was 15, and so I speak the language quote unquote fluently. But think of those 6 years, all the additional language you learn, all the advanced words, college level vocabulary, none of that. So I'm like, how do you say these words? And so that was hard. And then there's also.
So you went back when you were 21?
21, yeah. And then there was also this aspect of like, okay, I have all these friends that I had stuff in common with. And on the one hand, as soon as we see each other, we're like, dude, what's up? And it is sort of back to the thing. But we've now experienced 6 years in completely different ways.
Yeah.
And so there's all these...
very experience-packed years.
Yeah. And so there's all these frames of reference we don't have about each other. Because I'm like, oh, I can't talk about how my swim team went because they weren't anywhere near, and they took this trip to some place that I wasn't even informed of. So it was a little bit like, oh man, I missed out on a lot.
What about like culture shock in the sense of language and customs and that kind of stuff?
So here is another huge thing that happened. Music. When I left, there's this style of Colombian music called vallenatos, And when I was there growing up, vallenatos to us in the big city were sort of like how some of us view country music here. Okay. Where it's like, like I like old country music, but a lot of times I look down on country music and stuff.
Is it Oompa Loompa music?
No, it's a little more very accordion heavy and very intense lyrics, but it's sort of the thing it's got in common with the country music. It's sort of like if you listen to the lyrics, a lot of it is about like when my wife left me and all these kind of things. And I didn't appreciate it at all. Not only that, there was also a class structure thing where we looked at it like that's the kind of music the housemaids listen to. Oh. The people from the prairie, the people from the coast. That's not,
What kind of music did you guys listen to?
Well, we listened to gringo music. Oh. And also there was rock, Spanish rock. So there were these bands that were coming up that were emulating a lot of the music from the Gringolandia. But I go back.
What did you say, Gringolandia?
Gringolandia, yeah.
Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Gringolandia.
But then I go back.
It's like Portlandia. That'd be a great show.
I go back 6 years later, and I'm sitting there talking, so what music you guys listen to? It's like, oh, Carlos Vives. Now, here's the thing. Carlos Vives, to me, is this actor in a soap opera when I left about a little boxing guy. And I'm like, wait, the boxing guy? That little El Gallito Ramirez? They're like, oh, yeah, that's so long ago. No, he's a musician. I'm like, what kind of music does he do? Vallenatos. And I'm like, get out of here. You're not into. It's like, yeah, it's all the rage. And I sort of like feel like they're putting me on. No, everyone is full on in. And this guy, because he was so famous, he sort of brought back vallenatos to the new generation and reintroduced all these old hits, re-recorded them with him and the bands and stuff. And then everyone was into it. So it was a big change. I'm like, I felt so left out. I'm like, because we would go dancing and they're all singing the songs and, oh, I love this one. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening?
Did it make you feel disconnected, bad?
It did. It helped. It made me feel disconnected. One other thing that also made me feel a little out of the loop is, remember, when I left was at the peak of the chaos and the bombs and the things. And so I was sort of still expecting that sort of situation. And everyone was like, dude, what are you talking about? That's so long ago. Like, things are fine right now. And I was still very, very, like, paranoid and things like that. So that was also a little different.
Interesting. Yeah, there's many names for this experience. We said reverse culture shock. There's also just culture shock, cultural retooling, or acculturation, or acculturative stress. The stress of learning how to behave in a new or a previous culture. Code switching, which is switching between different ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving depending on the cultural milieu. And there's many other terms.
By the way, I want to point out that I am not proud, because a minute ago I said like, oh, that's the kind of music that the housemaids would listen, or the prairie. I'm not proud of that sentiment now at all. Yeah. But at the time, that's sort of how we thought.
Yeah, totally. Classism is a thing, one. Two, when you're younger, it's harder to check yourself before you
check your privilege.
Yeah, because you're young and you just don't.
That's right.
You're not, and that was ageist of me to say right there. All right. And I say that also from personal experience, because when I was younger, I'll tell you a little story about classism when I was a kid. I had a football coach who was very dear to me, still is, friends with him on Facebook. And he was a very formative person in my childhood. And is that the right term, formative person?
Formative.
He was very important. Yeah.
Formative influence.
And because a football coach, when you're a kid, is someone that you spend a lot of time with, and someone who does a lot of bad things to you.
Yeah.
and does a lot of good things for you. But he
makes you sweat till you bleed.
He worked in Issaquah at the Dairygold Center, which is still there.
Oh yeah.
Dairygold is a local dairy outlet.
Yeah.
And so he worked there, and he worked right on the main street. And so when you drove by, which was the main street in Issaquah, you could see him like cleaning the truck. The trucks would pull up essentially and just get milk like poured. That was back in the day when things were different, but that's where he worked. And I was talking with with a friend of my parents, and I was like, yeah, he works at the Dairy Gold Center or something.
Oh.
And I was probably 15-ish or something. And the friend of the family, I don't know why, but went to my parents with it, which I'm actually glad that they did. And my parents sat me down and had one of the most like eye-opening, confrontations with me about how that's honest work and you're not above it. You know what I mean? And your coach is a great man.
Yeah.
And that's an honest living, and how dare you like put someone down because of their job?
Wow.
Yeah. And
good talk.
Yeah, it was extremely eye-opening to me, and from that day forward I tried hard to be that way.
Right.
But just because I absorbed the culture as a young person, I looked down on manual laborers and looked up to people like Gordon Gekko and that kind of thing in the 80s. So that's what I'll say about that. But anyway, so what is culture shock? What's the definition we can say about that?
It's maybe when the customs, maybe the fashions or the habits of the people that you're around are so unusual to what you're used to that you actually experience some distress or some
distress or disorienting experience of entering a new culture. That's good. It also involves some amount of grief, meaning the grief of loss. So, because you're losing your old culture. For you, when you came to the States, tell us about that culture shock.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, what's weird about that one, I was expecting way more culture shock that direction.
Yeah.
Because
you moved from Bogota to Tacoma. Yeah, Tacoma, Washington. And you were in the suburbs, right?
I was in the Tacoma suburbs, absolutely.
Like the nice suburbs.
Yeah, the nicer area, yeah. So I was really expecting to be like in the Karate Kid. Like I was going to show up, there's going to be this guy from Cobra Kai, and I was going to be chased in bikes, and I was going to have to learn Kung Fu from some old, rickety guy.
Yeah.
And, but you know what? No, it was actually fine. The biggest aspects of culture shock I found were that I went from being free to move around. In Bogota at 15, I could travel all over the place because there were so many buses. It's a grid of buses that I could go anywhere. So if I was going to go visit my friend who was like 40 minutes away, like I could. So I had that freedom of movement, even though I didn't have a car. I come there and all of a sudden I'm basically all but grounded. Yeah. I have no car. I have no way to get out. If someone with a car doesn't pick me up, I'm screwed. My mom's not taking me anywhere. I'm not borrowing the car because I don't have a license. Nothing. It was shocking,
What about like just the shock of being in a culture that speaks a different language, that has a different set of mores? I mean, maybe Colombia is more similar to...
The thing is, A, I spoke the language fluently already. B, I had grown up...
Why did you speak the language fluently?
Because I had spent 2 years when I was very little in the East Coast. So I had picked it up when I was little enough.
And you watched a lot of gringo.
I watched all my media was... Well, that's not fair because it was translated to Spanish. So that doesn't quite count. But the influences, all the music I was listening to.
When you landed, when you were 15 from the plane, you could speak English pretty well?
Oh, it was fluent. I was fluent in English.
So that would have really helped reduce the culture shock.
That definitely helped, yes.
Yeah, because imagine if you didn't have that, you'd just be
That's true.
Okay.
So that was not something I had to sweat.
Did you have an accent, more of an accent back then?
I probably did. But remember, because I learned both when I was like 2.
Yeah.
I sort of developed both with pretty close to no accent, So in Spanish right now, I have more of an accent than I do in English.
Because you've been in the States longer.
Because I've been here for so long. Yeah. But anyways, so that part wasn't so much it. I also, all my musical influences, everything I was listening to was all from Top 40. Casey Kasem, all this stuff. I had been visiting my mom in the summers for the last 2 summers prior to that. So I had also had friends. So there were a lot of bridges that helped me.
Yeah.
There were some things, for example, I mentioned the transportation thing, which actually was a big deal. The second one was alcohol, which at first hit me a little bit because I was already drinking. And I went from like already drinking freely at parties and stuff to the next time I drank was when I was like probably 21.
Wow.
You know?
You didn't drink in college?
I mean, I probably did. No, yes, you're right. I probably did at parties.
But not much.
Frat parties and stuff. But like not at restaurants, not at, yeah.
Wow.
Don't get me wrong. I am sure I had drinks here or there. But I in Colombia, every time when there was a party, I was drinking.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, I don't drink at all in high school. I don't think I drank. Oh, I did have one pina colada at one restaurant when we were traveling with my parents because I was bold enough to ask, and they brought it to me. It was the weirdest thing.
Well, okay, so you had a lot of bridges to reduce the culture shock. What about like at school, like the way kids talk to each other?
Okay, so let me think. So school was so my school. I went to a bilingual school that was modeled after the U.S. system in Bogota. So there were actually also similarities there. But there was one big difference. So we had one classroom that we were at for most of the day, whereas here I had to migrate from classroom to classroom and sort of carry my thing. And I had a locker, which there our lockers were in our room. Here our locker was in the hallway, and so that did create new dynamics. You know, that was interesting. I also had to find new friends, so that was a thing. And I remember my first friends I made. I will always feel bad about this. So it's lunchtime, I think, and I find these 2 guys that are sitting by themselves, and they look very, very nerdy. But, you know, I'm probably super nerdy too, and I'm like, hey, man, what's up? And so I sit down, we start talking, and they're extremely nerdy, like dial the nerdy to like 11. It was actually hard to like have conversations with them and stuff. But I was always like very like, hey, I just want to make a friend, and this is fine. So I was hanging with them, and about a week in, I had made a couple other friends that were into music, and one day one of them, who you know, comes over. It's like, hey, you should come sit with us. And then I'm like, okay. So then I stand up and I look at the 2 of them, and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go sit over there on that table.
It's funny. If I was to make a movie, I would have 2 flash forwards presented to you, like you're looking at the 2 kids and they're looking at you like, if you leave, like 33% of our table is going to be lost, and you have 2 flash forwards, or you have 1 flash forward of being with them, and it's just like 20 years later, you're like spouseless, sitting around a table, not saying anything, just like you are right now.
Or we did a startup that's now worth billions.
It was Bill Gates.
Yeah. So I did feel really bad, but honestly, those were in my circle, they were the quote unquote cool kids. They weren't really the cool kids, but they were the Asians who were into Depeche Mode and wore gothy clothes.
Yeah. I find it really interesting that you can't remember having more culture shock, you know, because, I mean, just one more question, just because I'm really trying to dig here.
Yeah.
Like in the first week you came to the States, was there any sense of like, holy crap, where am I?
Oh, no. That part, not only was there, holy crap, where am I? I think I told this story before, but I literally got fully lost the first day coming back from school.
Yeah.
Because my mom had forgotten to tell me where to get off on the bus. So it was the school bus. And the school bus driver, I don't know, they have no idea, or they don't pay attention, I guess, whatever. So I'm in the bus and I'm like realizing, oh crap, I don't know where to get off, and I have no friends on the bus yet. It's my first day. My mom dropped me off in the morning, so I didn't even get to see the route or anything. So now I'm on the way back, and I'm like, I literally don't know where I'm supposed to get off. And I'm looking out the window trying to recognize, and I finally see some stuff that looks sort of familiar, and I'm like, shit, I better get off here. So I'm like, I get off, and then I look around, and I'm like, where am I?
Oh my God.
And I start feeling like I need to use the bathroom.
And there's just no cell phones.
Of course not. So I need to poop. And I'm super nervous, and now I'm sweating profusely, and I'm scared shitless because I'm lost. And I'm started wandering and wandering. I went and knocked on a door. This super cute girl opens the door, and I'm like, "Can I use your bathroom, please?" She's like, I guess. And she totally let me in. I went, pooped in her bathroom, and then promptly left. It was the weirdest thing ever. And I was like, in my head, I'm like, she was so cute. I totally could have had a chance. And so then I'm like, back out in the wilderness. And I didn't even think to ask her anything. Like, I didn't even ask her for directions, nothing. I was just back out in the wilderness. And it took me probably 2 hours. Well, maybe it was less, but in my mind, it felt like 2 hours of wandering until finally I was like, that's the street. I totally recognize that street. And I finally got home.
You could have been miles, and never found your way back.
Absolutely. I could have been kidnapped by a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I got home, and get this, when my mom gets home, I'm like, Mom. So I was upset. I'm like, Mom, like, I got lost. I didn't know where to get off. And she's like, oh yeah, like, I didn't tell you where to get off. And that was it.
God.
I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. So the stress of being in another, did you feel different since you were in a different culture?
Yes. Everything at that moment.
Because if I was in Colombia and got lost, next week, I would be 100 times more terrified than if I got lost in Seattle somewhere, right? So because you don't know how do people ask for help? Are people, because if I'm in Seattle and I'm lost, I'm not going to feel super enthusiastic about knocking on someone's door, but I'm going to feel a lot more enthusiastic than if I'm in Colombia and I'm knocking on someone's door, because in Colombia, I don't know, are people going to think I'm robbing them, or how do I, and how do I gauge a good house from a bad house? And how do I gauge a person who looks like a criminal as opposed to looks like a friendly person? And, because if I was wandering a neighborhood, I would probably pick a house that had like kids. I'd look, but in Colombia, how do I know, know? And so did you experience that?
I think so. Now, again, I will give the caveat that because I had visited my mom for 2 months, 2 years in a row previously, I did have more familiarity, right? But that being said, I think in that moment, because just now when I was telling the story, man, I was stressed. In that moment, I think it all did hit me. I'm like, I don't know where I am. I have no way to get back to my real home, in quotes, like where I just left, because I had just arrived the previous day. It was a Sunday when I arrived. Now it was Monday.
Just think about how crazy it is. Your mom picks you up at the airport, and then you start school the next day in a foreign country. And she just drops you off.
Right.
And, in her head, she's like, well, he'll find his way home.
I don't think she even thought that far. I don't know.
But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, my God.
It was crazy. And so then I think that you're right. In that moment, even speaking the language, even having been there before, it was a complete meltdown. I was like, holy shit. And you know what? It happened to me again later that week, but not as bad. But I went with the cross-country team. I joined the cross-country team, and we went on our run. And so because I lived at altitude, 9,000 feet, when the run started, I was right at the front of the pack. And actually the coach was like, whoa, look at the new kid. And I wasn't feeling it at all. But because I hadn't trained, like I wasn't trained, my muscles started failing about halfway through the run. And I had to start falling back till I was the last one. And then I couldn't even see, after a while, I couldn't even see the front of the where the people were. And then I'm like, I don't know the route. And now I'm in the middle of this trail in the big park. I don't know where I'm at. So shit, again, I got lost. And luckily, two of the coaches from the school were like taking a walk. And they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm sort of lost. They're like, oh, just go this way or whatever. And I could swear they were saying, stupid kid. Like I got this sense from them, like disdain, like stupid kid.
So since I already derailed this episode earlier when I went down the comedy rabbit hole,
I forgot about that.
I want to share a few stories that this just triggered because I feel like it and it's late and you're just gonna have to deal with it, listeners. But last weekend I went skiing for the first time in a while.
I saw pictures.
Yeah, and I haven't been skiing in a long time, and I went to Crystal, which I used to go to all the time as a kid, but I'm not familiar with it anymore because I haven't been there literally 30 years or something. And I was with people that were very familiar with Crystal, and when we're on the chair, my friend David, he's like, so what we're gonna do, Kirk, is we're gonna head to the right, and we're gonna take a track, and then there's going to be an elbow of another track, and then you're going to take that track down, and then we'll meet at the chair. And in his mind, he's a great guy.
He's terrible.
But
he's a great guy.
He's a terrible describer of because I went to the right and I was following them, and then I was midday, and so I was getting a little cocky, and I thought, I could probably manage this on my own. I don't need to follow them all the time. And there was no elbow in the track. You know what I mean? I kept waiting for this turn. Yeah. And I think I was following some other randos, and all of a sudden I find myself, I'm in pure powder. There was just a ton of snow, and I'm in the woods. But there's other tracks around, and I'm thinking, well, just keep heading down, and eventually I'll hit something that's familiar, and
like a rock.
Yeah. And so I'm heading my way down the way that it feels natural. And then all of a sudden, I keep going like, this doesn't really feel right. And then all of a sudden, I get to this point where there's no tracks ahead of me. It's just pure, untouched snow.
Backcountry.
And I can't, there's a little lip that looks kind of like a cliff, and I can't see beyond it. You know what I mean? Like my hands are getting sweaty just thinking about it.
No.
I was like just feet away from this cliff, and I couldn't, because the closer you get to a pseudo cliff, you especially when you're skiing, you can see like, it's just a really steep hill, but it's not a cliff. So, because I can ski, double blacks.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
So you're really good.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up skiing as a Seattleite in Snoqualmie and Crystal as a kid, and so it'd been a while, but I can manage. It's just not comfortable because I'm not practiced, but I can manage. At least I think I can. But anyway, but I do know enough to know that if this is untouched snow on a busy place, and I'm in the middle of the woods and I can't see a single chairlift from where I'm at, and I don't see another human being, and I can't see anyone, and there looks like a cliff. This is one of those stories, where someone falls out, because the other thing is, like, even if it's not that far, you could break your leg and freeze to death.
Absolutely.
Or you could go head first into a little kind of weird crevice and like suffocate, you know what I mean? If no one's around to help you.
So you start freaking out.
So for 2 seconds, just like that, the feeling that you said of just like, oh my God, I'm in a foreign country. I have no idea where I'm at. I had, a very similar feeling, and I just yelled out, fuck, because I realized what my situation was I don't know where I'm at. I don't know even if I'm safe.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to fix the problem, because with skiing, if I had snowshoes, I would have just hiked my way out of it. Hiking while carrying skis and poles in powder, very thick powder, like up to my mid thigh, maybe, in ski boots is extremely hard. So I told myself, because I had this feeling like, well, just go over the cliff. I'm sure it's fine. Just get down the hill. But I said to myself, because I've seen a lot of documentaries about this sort of thing, and I remembered, people who panic die. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People who panic die. And so I stopped everything I did, and I just stood there. and I just assess the situation. It's like, I'm okay. But the thing is do you ski at all?
Yeah, I was just skiing in Whistler 2-3 weeks ago.
Okay. You know, there are certain times, I don't know about you, but there are certain times when I'm skiing when I'm like, I am this close to dying. Like if things went just a little wrong.
I think I haven't quite gone, because I didn't grow up skiing. The first time I ever skied, I was 15, and I only did a couple times and stuff. But I have skied intermittently. So I could do a black, not a double black kind of thing. So the most I've ever gotten into danger was one time, I think at Crystal, where the people I was with were like, you could handle this. And I was like, are you sure? And then they took me down a double black, and I was totally not ready for it. And I was freaking out the whole time. And I don't even know how I survived. Yeah. But other than that, I don't usually get myself into that risky of situation.
Well, I have, for some reason, I've just always had this sense skiing that at any time, something really terrible can happen. I mean, on the way up just earlier in the day on a chairlift, this guy broke his leg or something. What? And he was screaming at the top of his lungs. My God. And it just happened, you know?
He broke his leg on the going downhill?
Yeah, so we were on the chairlift going up, and right below us, like I didn't see what happened, I assumed it was his leg, so I don't know, maybe that kind of put a pall on everything. Geez. But anyway, so and the other thing was I had my cell phone.
Oh yeah.
So I knew that if I needed to, but I didn't know how to describe where I was, you know. Anyway, to end this long stupid story, I hiked my way up. I hiked back. Okay. And then, but I still couldn't find anybody or any kind of real track through the woods. There was some tracks, but I was like, and then these guys came by, and I yelled at them, and I said, "Can I follow you?" Because the thing is if I crash and I'm head first in a hole, they can pull me out. Yeah. You know, like I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about being alone. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I followed them, and then and I was like, "Do you know where we're at?" And they're like, they're like, "I don't even know how we got back here." They were scared too. They were like, "I don't know. I'm like, "Do you know how to get out?" They're like, "No." Like, "Do you know how to get out?" And I'm like, "No." And I'm like, "Well, could I just follow you guys?" And then they got to a ridge, and they were like, "Oh, it looks pretty steep down there. Maybe let's." So we kind of wound our way out. But anyway,
that's crazy.
Meanwhile, my friends could care less. You know, I had 5 friends that did like 5 other runs while I was sitting there on the mountain.
I will say that at Whistler, just the other day that I was there, the conditions at the top were full whiteout. Like it was snowing intensely, that icicly snow, and you couldn't see 2 feet in front of you at one point.
I hate that.
And keep in mind, so, you know, I'm not trying to go down the double blacks or anything, but I'm sitting there not knowing if I'm about to crash into another skier. Yeah. And so it's by feel, because you don't really know. And then so all of a sudden the floor feels like it drops under you.
Yeah, that's awful. Or super foggy is terrible too. Yeah, I hate that. Was it that way the whole time? Or?
No. And actually, I had a really great time. But it's just that, in fact, some of it was almost like I felt this is the closest I'm going to get to braving the elements, as if I were my friend Ty Berzoni in the Arctic or the South Pole or something. Yeah. So, you know, I'm just as brave as those guys that go and save people in the South Pole.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So getting back on track with culture shock here. This episode is completely off the rails, but anyway, culture shock is a disorientation or a distress as a result of entering a new culture. We also experience grief of losing our old culture and our old place. You can also experience being marginalized by the dominant culture. Did you experience any marginalization?
Okay, so that's a good point. So back to when I came here. One aspect, I was talking about music. So even though I was very much aware of the popular music here, because I listened to Top 40, on the other hand, at parties, we always danced Latin music, salsa, merengue, those kind of things. And you always dance with a girl, you know, you're always dancing together and stuff like that.
Like with holding hands.
Yeah, you're one hand on the hips and the other.
And I've seen you do this merengue dancing, and it is it is highly active, and you're throwing that woman around like a bag of potatoes. Yeah.
And that's how,
and they usually really like it.
Yeah, usually. And so then I go to these parties, which I didn't go to that many, but we'd go to or the dances, the school dances.
Okay, so again, if we're going back to our movie script here, you're like, oh, we're all going dancing, and then like you and your new Asian like semi-cool friends, you run in and like you just grab the first girl and you start throwing her around, and your 5 Asian friends are looking at you going, he's ruining our lives. And this girl's like, wee.
Yeah, basically what happened was similar to that, where we go to these dances, and first of all, I'm like, why is no one dancing with anyone? Yeah. This is so weird. So me and my friend Ty, we decide we don't care. We're going to dance. And so we were the weirdos in the middle of the dance floor doing all the crazy, dancing to Erasure and The Cure, going, gyrating in all sorts of very bizarre ways. But that was the closest I got to experiencing dance from the thing. But the biggest thing that I remember now that you mentioned
just an asterisk here. I think a big protective element to culture shock is friends and confidence, which you clearly had.
Yeah, I did. That helped a lot. Yeah.
Because like if you were shyer or less sure of yourself, you could have felt like really put upon and marginalized, where you're the sort of guy who's just like, well, screw it, I'm just gonna make this my own scene,
and that's absolutely true. On the other hand,
so basically
narcissistic, yeah. On the other hand, I'm in the classroom there, and I think I've also mentioned this before, but for example, my physics professor starts cracking jokes left and right about Colombia.
Yeah.
And every time I meet someone, I'm the first Colombian they've ever met. And the only other thing they know about Colombia is Escobar and the drugs and maybe the coffee. Also, I am not at all into football, nor do I understand anything about it. I barely understand baseball. And yet the only time they're trying to relate to me on soccer, they're like, oh, but at least you know soccer. And I'm the one Colombian who didn't really know soccer. So I'm trying to talk about basketball and not a lot. So those things are all sort of weird there. So that's definitely different. And then lastly, fashion-wise, I grew up in my school in Colombia, there were uniforms. So I never had to think about what I wore.
Oh.
I just put on my uniform. You had some choices like which watch, maybe the shoes, maybe sort of, but not really. And here, it's like every day is a new day, right? But my mom bought my clothes, so I had no sense of style or fashion or anything for the longest time. I was just like, I would just wear whatever. So I go back and I look at these pictures and I'm like, why am I wearing fluorescent pink shorts with a blue Columbia, like the trademark, the brand jacket that goes down to my knees almost. And
it was the 80s.
It was the end of the 80s, yeah. Like, it was bizarre.
Yeah. So, yeah, marginalization. Also feeling disoriented because you can no longer predict other people's behavior. I think this is the key to culture shock, is when you're in your own culture or a culture you're very familiar with, you begin to predict how other people are going to react. When you say hello, they say hello back. When you say, how you doing? They say fine, even though things aren't fine. When you say, how about them Seahawks?
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. Like, there's a certain routine to the way people interact with each other. When you go to a restaurant, there's a way of interacting. Right. like just one tiny stupid example is in other countries. I think Japan's one of them. I think this is true. You have to yell at not yell, but you have to call your waiter over. So it's impolite for a waiter to come over and say, do you need anything? That the waiter waits until you go, sumimasen, and you just scream, and then the waiter comes. If you did that in the States, if you're just like, excuse me, and just screamed that's rude.
Right.
And so times a million, that's all those little routines, all these little rules. And so when you realize, holy crap, I'm in a culture that I don't know the rules to.
Right.
It can be very scary. It can be very disorienting because
frustrating.
Yeah, and frustrating.
So you were talking about humor. I just remembered the more we dig, the more I'm remembering like, oh yeah, this was different. And shit. In the bus going to school after I had made a couple of friends, I'm sitting there and I'm starting to try to like say funny things, to integrate and stuff. So my style of humor in Colombia and most of my friends and a lot of the culture in my family and stuff like that, very sarcastic but dry. So you would say a lot of things that are clearly not real, but you would say them in a dry way, and that was sort of part of the humor. So I'm sitting there in the bus, and as an example, let's say someone, in fact, I think it was almost literally this. Someone says something about the New Kids on the Block, and I'm like, well, that's one of the best bands of all time, as an example, right? And then this guy, this big, tall Italian guy that I became good friends with after that, but he's like, are you a moron? Like, there's terrible or whatever. And I'm like, I was obviously kidding. He's like, no, you weren't. You just said they're the greatest band. And I was so frustrated. I'm like, now they really think that I meant that. But I was obviously being sarcastic, but they think I'm trying to cover my tracks. And I found that happened to me a lot, where I would try to say something totally in that dry, like, ironic way. And they would take me literally.
You still do that.
I still do that, but now I don't care. But they would take me literally.
Yeah, and they still take you literally.
And I couldn't back out of it without them thinking I was an idiot.
Yeah, interesting.
Oh, so frustrating.
So is that a Colombian humor thing? Or
I don't know
is
if
that
it's
just you?
But that's how my friends joked.
Yeah.
That's how me and my family, that's how we joked.
Yeah. I think that's, again, an element that is evidence that Colombia had more sophisticated humor. Because when I was growing up, Monty Python was like the most sophisticated thing I'd ever seen. Like when I saw Holy Grail when I was like 10 or something,
yeah,
I just couldn't believe how funny it was and but it's so dry, right?
Sure.
And by dry we mean deadpan, where you don't play up the fact that you're joking,
right?
Like the way you said it. So, well, everyone knows New Kids is the best band on earth. Like that's a funny joke because it's so deadpan, right? If you were like, well, everyone knows that,
which I had to start doing, by the way. I was so frustrated, but I had to start literally like, well, yeah, of course. I start doing that.
So I want to tell you a story about because I'm born and raised in the Seattle area. And so I've never had to experience what you've experienced, but I have traveled occasionally and can talk a little bit about at least some of the feelings that, I've had. For instance, I've talked about this before on the podcast about a psychosomatic or a psychogenic physical pain in my leg when I was in Japan.
Oh, right. I remember that.
Well, one of the things that really amped up my anxiety, which caused the psychogenic problem to increase, was that when you're walking around Japan, I had friends that lived in Japan, and I would, on the subway and on the buses and trains, I would see these little janky advertisements, and I would ask them, what is it? And they'd say, oh, that's for a doctor, for like a foot doctor, or that's a lung doctor.
Okay.
And I was like, that's weird. Like just these individual doctors. And they're like, yeah, in Japan, the medical system's different. And I don't know if it's still this way. And I don't even know if they were being accurate, but the way they portrayed it to me, it gave me this impression that the Japanese medical system was just a bunch of private practitioners.
I see.
And and the fact that they were it's made it feel like sleazy law offices. Do you know what I mean?
I see. Did you get hurt today?
Yeah, it felt like that, or like minor dentistry, do you know?
Yeah.
And so when I had this pain in my leg, I was wondering, should I go to the doctor? But then I thought, but I don't trust
these quacks.
Yeah. Of course, Japan is what they call a first world country with like cutting edge medicine, of course, but I didn't trust my ability to navigate to a doctor that was good. Because like if you're in the States and you had a problem, there's a lot of different options, right? Yeah. You got the ER, you have urgent care, you have urgent care clinics, you have local clinics, you have hospitals, you have like group health, you have big hospitals, you have little, like there's a lot of different options. And we generally know what the best option is. And we can kind of, like if you go to the urgent care and they start advising you to do all these different things, like you kind of know, well, I'll talk with my primary doc about
I'll
that.
double check, get second opinion.
Well, I'm in another country and I'm being told like their system is kind of weird. So it really increased my terror and, of course, my psychogenic problem.
I'm picturing something where you put a coin in this machine, a window slides up, and the doctor's like, "Hello, how can I help you?"
Exactly. That's what it sort of was portrayed to me. Okay. So, other kinds of things that I haven't mentioned are, how do people deal with conflict? If someone bumps into you on the bus and they're upset, how do you manage that? Mm-hmm. How do you know if they're super serious, scary person or just a normal non-scary person?
Right.
How do you ask people for help? Who do you call when you're in danger? These are questions that are pretty complicated, and if you're in a new culture, you're not going to know the answers to that. Also, acculturative stress or culture shock can be caused by not being able to retain your culture over time. The society not supporting your culture. For instance, a rural guy who likes to hunt, he moves to a liberal city like Seattle, where people hate guns.
Yeah.
And he can't participate or advertise his culture anymore. Mm-hmm. He can't talk about guns. He can't subscribe to a gun magazine. He can't show his guns to people. It's a culture shock.
Right.
Now, many authors have proposed solutions to culture shock to reduce the impact of it. What do you think, Berto? What's the solution to just general culture shock?
To general culture shock, maybe finding other folks in the area that are from your original culture, finding support groups, like maybe finding I would have been sort of out of luck in my case, but if you're a Mexican person that moves to let's say the city of Seattle, there are Mexican communities. You can find a Mexican community and sort of integrate. Now that might slow your integration otherwise, I don't know, but at least it gives you a little bit of a anchor.
Totally. Yeah, a lot of people will point to things like that. We might call them cultural facilitators or something, who can help you adjust. So it'd be someone that was either very familiar with Mexican culture or a Mexican American themselves and could be that bridge, could explain things, could mediate if necessary, could say, well, when I came to the States, I had no idea about this, and so let me tell you about that. And feel free to ask me any questions, email me any questions you have. And so having a facilitator like that can be extremely helpful. Also, classes to help with acculturation or with culture shock and with the language.
I would also think maybe taking it slow at first and observing a lot.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't have known to do that.
Rather than just rushing onto the dance floor and dancing.
Yeah. just I'm not going to, not that again, in my situation, you're a kid, you're 15. I didn't have a choice not to go to school the next day. It's just okay, whatever. But if you have the ability to kind of pace yourself a little bit, don't try a new thing every single day.
Because you run the risk of making more mistakes.
Yeah.
And then regretting it later.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And also overload. Okay, today I learned something, but tomorrow's a completely different group of people. And it's you don't get a chance to get comfortable with any of it.
Yeah. Also, therapy can help. In my early career, I was often this so-called cultural facilitator for people. Most of the therapy was me just helping them feel comfortable with living in Seattle, which was entirely new to them. Uh-huh. And oftentimes I would just gab with them. And I could tell that they were learning about Seattle culture and about Seattleites through our conversations, and it seemed to reassure them. They seemed, and sometimes were overtly thankful for having a local and a person of power who's a therapist, who is a clinician. They felt extremely grateful and would give me gifts, which was always great, because their food was always so great. Right. I remember this one family, I would go to their home, Mexican family, and they would make me tamales, and I'd bring them home and eat the crap out of those things.
But you brought the Mexicans home?
And they were, I remember that family really well, and they were really cool, nice family.
Maybe another thing would be, which is easier said than done, but try to make at least one, maybe a couple new friends and spend time with them so you can start getting like someone
absorbing.
Yeah, absorbing, and also having sort of like help from someone that cares about you. Because if they start caring about you, then they're going to be more patient. They're going to spend more time with you.
So to address the patron Cameron's specific question about reverse culture shock, returning to your home culture, things that I can say about this that are in our culture that are sometimes talking about is like you've gone native, when you went back to Colombia, they were like, oh, you've gone gringo.
You've gotten gringo.
Yeah, you've gone native. J-Lo had her song Jenny from the Block, right? She's like, oh, I've left the block, but I'm still Jenny from the Block. There's a lot of pressure when you come back for you to be the same, if you weren't, you're betraying the culture. It's particularly if you seem to have stepped up. If you stepped up to a culture that is perceived as higher, then the original culture will ridicule you and degrade you.
It was so much so that my cousin told me that I walked differently.
Yeah.
When I went back,
you walk like a gringo.
Yeah, she was like, you walk differently. You don't walk like a Colombian.
Like in a condescending way.
Yeah, like you lost your swagger or something.
You're no longer a Colombian.
Yeah.
You're an uptight gringo.
Yeah.
An example that I thought of when I was, thinking about this was when I was in grade school, there was a girl, a friend of ours, who moved to Texas for, maybe a couple years. And then she came back. And she totally had a Texas accent, which makes sense when you're 5 or 7 or 8 or something, and and we all made total fun of her. We're just like, listen to your stupid accent, and it's just like, why? What's threatening about a natural process of coming to the United States and walking like a gringo.
Right.
Walk like a gringo. It's just dumb. Also, in the military, there's a lot of, actually, you'll find a lot of reverse culture shock literature put out by the government in the military.
Oh, sure.
Because of high suicide rates and all that kind of stuff. But like The Hurt Locker, you remember that movie?
Yep.
He comes back to the States, and they really portrayed the reverse culture shock really well.
Yeah.
Because for the first hour of the movie, he's like in utter peril all the time.
That's right.
And then suddenly he's home, and he's like in a grocery store with his wife.
Yeah.
And they're walking down the aisle, and he's pushing the cart, and you just really got the sense of like, this is very different from where he was, and he didn't fit. And ultimately, he decided to go back because he
felt more at home.
He just didn't feel right back home anymore.
Right.
Now, as we talked about with you, there are a lot of factors that play into the severity or the distress or the disorientation with regards to reverse culture shock. Things like, did you return to your home? I'm going to refer to it as home culture or foreign culture, but those words are kind of funny given that home is a subjective thing. But, did you return to the home culture by choice? Or did you return because you were forced to, or you ran out of money? Like, that'll be a factor. How long were you gone?
Right.
How old were you when you were gone? Like, if you had left when you were 25 and come back when you were 31, that would have been a lot different, you know what I mean, than those years that you were. If you would have left when you were 2 and came back when you were 8, you would have been basically a gringo coming.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Actually, and that sort of happened when I was very little, because I had been boarding Bogota and stuff like that. Leave when I'm like 1.5, and now I'm in Boston for a bit, then I'm in New York for a bit. So at the time I went back to Colombia, I was speaking at best Spanglish. Like, I was mixing words left and right, and I was very culturally U.S. at that moment because, I had spent 2 years at that like 3 like 2 and 3 in the States.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Other factors are, have you returned before? Like you had sort of gone back and forth between the States. And so that's a factor. How acculturated were you to the foreign culture? How different are the cultures? I mean, I think one thing that I'm realizing as you talk about your experience is that Colombian culture in the 80s was not that much different than U.S. culture.
There were similarities, more so than if I had moved, say, to China or to
India.
India,
Has your home changed that much? How much has it changed? How much did you idealize either culture? Do you like your home culture? Did you stay in contact with your home culture and the people there? How connected are you to the foreign culture? Blah, blah, blah. There are several proposed stage models to culture shock and reverse culture shock. For example, many people claim that people often experience a honeymoon period when before they experience the full disorientation. They'll land on the plane, and for a couple of weeks they'll be like, "Oh, I'm not having any culture shock. This is fine." And then all of a sudden, like this depression or anxiety kind of sets in. But I'm not a fan of universal stage models. Yeah. Certainly, there could be a honeymoon period, but I'm guessing for many people there isn't. Blah blah blah. The other example I can give is I spent a few months on a road trip across the United States, and although the rest of the United States isn't that much of a different culture than Seattle, although it is somewhat different. I remember when I was driving home and I crested the Snoqualmie Pass, which is the mountains just as then you start going downhill into the Pacific Northwest. And the feeling I got from the greenery and the moisture and the people, I just remember feeling like I'm home again. Do you know what I mean? So I've even though I've born and raised in this area, I have had glimpses of what I would call culture shifting anyway, but not obviously as much as you have. So what's the final word, Berto, on culture shock and reverse culture shock for patron Cameron?
Well, on the one hand, I've discovered that I had more than I remembered.
Well, nothing like a therapist to help you remember your pain in life.
That's right. But I think, don't isolate. Find some friends. Take it easy. Observe. See if you can find some anchors back to your previous culture, like people from that area or groups, things like that. Therapy, and have fun with it. There's new things to discover.
Good. I like it. If you haven't already become a patron of the podcast, go to patreon.com, become a patron, get access to all the premium episodes. I'm slowly adding all the episodes, so it will be like the main podcast feed that non-patrons listen to. For whatever reason, it limits itself to just the past few years. But this podcast has been going on for 8 years. And so if you want to listen to all the episodes, you have to become a patron of the podcast. In fact, I'm guessing at least half the episodes aren't available. But they are on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, they're all there.
So you're saying iTunes limits them?
Not iTunes, but WordPress. Remember when we switched over to WordPress?
Oh, I might be able to tweak that. Did you already try to fix it?
I have no idea how to tweak that.
I can take a look. Okay. I don't know but I'll take a look.
I mean, we did tweak it in the beginning. We're just now derailing the episode even more. But originally it was like 10 episodes, and then you tweaked it.
Okay. Well, I can maybe look at it.
And I'll look at what it is. I guess look at it because it's not. It should go back all the way, but it's not anyway. But many of our best episodes are for patrons only, and so if you become a patron, you'll get access to those awesome episodes. Also, tell a friend or colleague. Word of mouth is a big deal to us, especially if you're in the field. This is, I think, among the podcasts for clinicians and students in psychology and psychotherapy. I think it's a legit podcast.
It's the best
to check out, at least. Rate us on iTunes. And if you rate us on iTunes, send me an email and I'll send you some swag, even if you're not a patron. Also know that $20 patrons get mugs, which are super awesome official mugs for Psychology in Seattle.
Are they the mugs that have our mugs?
Yeah. Also, join the Facebook fan group on Facebook. That's run by famous patron Lyndon. There's a lot of exciting things going on there that I don't look at because I don't want to read things that are negative against me.
We had a really great discussion. Was it today or yesterday?
Right. So Lyndon posted something on the Facebook fan group. So we have a Facebook page that's regular that I run and you run actually, but it's pretty dry and it's kind of like a website.
It's by the book.
Yeah. But then the fan group has all sorts of chaos happening, which
those guys are out of control.
And we started an Instagram, which I will add another picture here of Berto looking like a monkey there because he's boo, 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 boo. Okay, so I'm going to Instagram that stuff. Actually, I think I need to pull back a little bit because I need to square it. Anyway, so join our Psychology in Seattle Instagram. I have no idea every time, basically, I figured out what I'm doing with Instagram is whenever you and I are together, whether we're at the movies or podcasting or I'm just going to take a picture of you and I'm going to post it.
Me?
So this is just going to be Instagram of Berto.
All right.
Another thing I want to say is a patron has published a book and it's available on Amazon. It's called I'm Here For You. I'm Here For You by Luke Lee. Patron Luke Lee has published a book called I'm Here For You. It's a good book if you want to learn more about communication and how to communicate well and how to be present with people, how to be like really a good listener and really pay attention. So again, available on Amazon, I'm Here For You. I'm Here For You by Luke Lee, patron Luke Lee. Go out and buy that book. Do it now. Also become a patron of the podcast. And if I haven't said this already, if we get another couple hundred patrons, I'm guessing that's what it'll take. We can start donating to Pet Finder, which is a wonderful organization that saves pets from being euthanized. They take, basically, my experience with Pet Finder is there's all these people who volunteer their time, their homes to help pets find homes for them. Right. So, for instance, for my cats, I went on petfinder.com and I found these two cats and I said, I want these two cats. And then the foster parents contacted me and they were in Oregon or maybe even California or something.
Whoa.
And they said, oh, great. You would like these cats? And I said, yeah, I'd like these cats. And they said, okay, well, we'll drive them up to you.
Wow.
So they're this retired couple. So then they come to so they drive all the way up to my house.
Oh my God.
and there's a suggested donation of $100 per pet, but you don't even have to do that. And the reason for this is because a lot of people donate to petfinder.com. Right. And a lot of people donate their time because it's a wonderful organization. Then these people tell me, oh, we got these cats from a woman who flew these cats on an airplane from Beirut, Lebanon.
Wow.
So there's this woman in Beirut, Lebanon who works with Pet Finder, and she will find stray cats on the street and get them their shots and everything and spay and neuter them. And then personally fly them to the States, get them in the Pet Finder foster system and then put them on the internet, and then they get rescued. So, whenever you're in foreign countries and you just see all these, feral dogs and cats running around, there are people who are actually trying to help them out, and being feral, there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes they don't look so healthy.
Sure.
And so, and I've had these cats for 9 years now, and I think it's really great.
But if it's a cow, we slaughter it.
Yeah. It's called Pet Finder, not Animal Finder.
Not Cow Finder.
Yeah. So thanks for really just putting a nice ending to that. But anyway, if we get a couple more hundred patrons, we'll be able to start donating to Pet Finder. And I'm really looking forward to that threshold happening.
Yeah.
Well, that does it for that long, meandering
What was this about?
Yeah, I don't know.
Sometimes I feel culture shock.
Sometimes you just got to have one of those episodes.
You do.
Well, that does it for that episode. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.